Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, sir. What's up?
Yes, we have spoken before. I am the Spanish-speaking person who uploaded the video about not descending of sanctity. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, the one I re-uploaded, you mean?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
from Mexico. You're doing a great job, man. Great job.
thanks. Thanks. I'm trying to continue with that. And I have noticed that like I have like follow you since a lot of time, and I have noticed that a lot of your views like change over time. One of the things that maybe have you, I don't know, I felt maybe that it's something that you have changed, but I don't know. It's the topic of the Eretz Israel. I have noticed that you speak more ideas of Rabbi Haim in your videos recently. I don't know if that changed on your posture, or you still continue to have the same posture about not needing to live in Eretz Israel, nor being in a chobah or obligation. In some sense, it's preferable not to. What's your opinion on that?
I don't think I ever taught that it was a chovah. I always thought it was a great thing. The vast majority of anti-Zionists today live in Israel. They live in places like Bnei Brak, Geula, Mea Shearim. When I started making videos, I was making videos in Israel. So if you saw my first videos, I'm standing in the mountains of Yehuda v'Shomron, and I'm saying that all of this could be yours if you convert. You get free citizenship. I was just stating the facts. And when I made Aliyah, I was an optimist for the government. And then I slowly changed my view. I still believe in the existence of the state. I just don't combine it with my religion at all. And I'm still friends with the same people I was friends with in Israel. I was friends with the hilltop settlers. I spent time in Kfar Tapuach. I was part of the JDL partially up there. I actually used to run kahana.org for around 5 years.
Okay.
And a lot of these hilltop settlers are not Zionists. These are the Kingdom of Judea guys, the guys who want to forcibly make the state of Israel religious. They don't care about the government. They hate the government. I remember when I lived in my yeshuv, the government would come and destroy our caravans and our outposts. So the picture or the face of religious Zionism nowadays is something that was born out of very not knowledgeable religious Jews. Those who really love the land, those who are building the settlements. I remember when I was in Israel, that was when they were giving back Gush Katif. And those Jews were upset when the government was there dragging them out of their settlements. Those guys were not religious Zionists. Yes, they love the land, but they don't give a crap about the government. So it's hard to see Orthodox Jews nowadays with pictures of Netanyahu. There's so many more parties, at least when I was there.
That's like the position of Bar Haim. He explicitly says that the regimen is wrong and that there's a lot of things to do and to change. And he speaks explicitly that Zionism is not the way to go, but anti-Zionism is not also the way to go. But it's just the main thing that I was thinking about is about the hiyuf or the mitzvah of living in Eretz Israel. What's your opinion on that issue? Because I remember that spoken about this topic before, you express a position like it's better for you to live in Chutz La'aretz than to live in...
It's not a chovah. The main opposition comes on the fact that the Rambam didn't include it in his 613 commandments. So the understanding is that he didn't include it because it was a temporary mitzvah. It was a mitzvah in the time of Yehoshua to conquer the land, to settle the land. And that's it. And this is really the opinion that's brought down by the Megillah Esther. The Megillah Esther, it's not a sefer, it's a commentary on Sefer Mitzvot.
I have heard actually the discussion where Rabbi Rahim brings the positions. He has like 4 shirim, more than an hour on the topic.
Well. Apart from what Chazal have to say and Rishonim have to say about the issue, we can't overlook what the Torah has to say on the issue. That God's going to exile you from the land when you do X, Y, and Z. So clearly, when someone's been kicked out of the land, they shouldn't assume that even though they just got exiled, they have some obligation to live in the land. And most anti-Zionists typically use one sugya in the Talmud of the 3 oaths, right? That one should not war against the nations to enter Israel in any way. I understand that we don't build halakha off of midrashim, or we don't necessarily take them seriously unless they're reiterating a Torah principle. And this is a Torah principle. The Torah says that when Israel begins to emulate the nations of the world, that God is going to exile them, and he's only going to bring them back when they do teshuvah. Okay, Israel has not done teshuvah. Israel, as it exists today, is a secular country. I'm not against people living in the land of Israel. I just think that if Israel doesn't get their act together, they're going to be exiled again. I mean, we're still in Galut, but they're physically going to be kicked out of the land again. And I think this is why Israel's suffering so much nowadays. I'm not against people living in the land. There are a lot of anti-Zionists, and I'm not an anti-Zionist, by the way, but people like Rav Yoelish, the Satmar Rebbe, was actually against people living in the land of Israel because he was scared that their children would go off. And it's true. It's true. Many people remain more religious or more consistently religious in Chutz La'aretz than in Israel, because in Israel, people could put their guard down, right? Like your daughter doesn't have to worry about dating a non-Jew because there's Jews everywhere. They're just not religious. So I see the argument.
Different if we're to live there.
I see the arguments from both sides. But if someone who lived there, I left for different reasons. I couldn't stand Israelis. And that's something that Americans really have a problem with. I lived there for 5 years, and English speakers typically hang around English speakers. So I was in the old city yeshiva crowd. I didn't really interact so much with Israelis, although I lived in a yeshuv. My yeshuv was pretty much English speaking. Just because I really didn't like engaging with Israelis. They're very primitive. The average Israeli, I'm sorry to say, is very primitive. There's great and beautiful Israelis. Don't get me wrong. But whenever you have to go to Mizrada Panim, to any government office, I mean, you're going to have to yell and you're going to have to scream because everything works backwards over there. People cut in line. They rip you off back and forth. That's why I left. But when I moved to Israel, I moved there with a romanticized notion of the country. And I was very disappointed of what I saw. That disappointment was amplified by living in the settlement because I saw how the government was giving land back to the Arabs, were tearing down Karavanim. That's the voice that's never heard. The settlers of the land, how they feel. They're the ones paying the price. It's easy to be a religious Zionist from South America or North America, but to be up in a hilltop in a caravan with all your possessions and have a bulldozer come and just knock it down, it's very disheartening. And seeing gay parades every year in Jerusalem, at least once a year in Jerusalem, probably 3 times a year in Tel Aviv and in Haifa. You know, Israel is the gay capital of the world now, the gay capital, at least Tel Aviv is. Israel has twice as many abortions per capita than the U.S., according to that organization, Efrat. It's very disheartening. The notion that we could force our way into Israel, contrary to what the Torah teaches. The Torah says that we have to wait. Now, I don't believe this whole notion like Rashi teaches that we have to wait for the temple to fall down from heaven. That's ridiculous. Okay, I have no problem with the Jews getting together and building a temple. I really don't want it built now, and I don't want a Sanhedrin now either, because who's going to run it? Chabad? Satmar?
So what exactly is the breakdown on that? Is it the Mashiach who builds the temple, or is the temple
There's no monolithic idea on this. Nobody knows. There are sources that teach you could build a temple without Mashiach. You don't need Mashiach to build a temple. You don't need Mashiach to have a king. The Rambam brings down in Hilchos Malachim that anyone from any one of the tribes could be a king, but only someone from David. And he brings down in his Eger Teman that from Shlomo can be Mashiach. So being Mashiach and being a king is not necessarily the same thing. So we could have a king and not necessarily have Mashiach. But we could have a temple and a Sanhedrin without necessarily having a king. According to the Pashat, at least the Pashat in the Chumash, having a king is more of a reshut. It's not an obligation. A country could run fine with a Sanhedrin and not a king. Of course, it's going to have a high priest. That's a necessity. So I'm not an anti-Zionist. I'm more what's called a non-Zionist, and that's the typical yeshivish approach. That we have no problem living in the land and visiting the land and enjoying a falafel shop on every corner and a shul on every corner. But we don't believe, as the Tefillah LeMedina says, that it's the final piece in the Messianic puzzle and that it's the first flourishing of the Messianic age. Nonsense. Whenever that's said in my synagogue, I sit down. And with a bunch of other Jews. Most people don't know that most people only know fluffy Judaism. They don't know that most Orthodox Jews are non-Zionists. And most Orthodox Jews don't say the prayer for the state of Israel on Shabbat. Not to mention that it goes against halakha to include what's called bekashot or tachanunim in Shabbat. In other words, you're not supposed to ask God for anything on Shabbat. So even saying the prayer for a state that, assuming it was endorsed and fit the criteria of halakha and the Chumash, it would still be forbidden to bless it on Shabbat.
So is it against halacha to be a statist, like someone who advocates for statehood?
The Torah, i.e. Judaism, does not endorse a Jewish government that's not religious. The state of Israel does not belong to the Jews. The state of Israel or the land of Israel belongs to Torah keepers, whoever they happen to be. In the Chumash, he says that this is my land, and you are gerim on my land, working my land. In other words, the land belongs to God. He gives it to whoever he wants to. And he says that the previous people who were on it were kicked out because of their behavior. And you know what? He kicked us out because of our behavior. Most people don't know that the early Zionists were atheists. They were communists. Actually, the state of Israel was a communist country. The first kibbutzim, basically socialist enclaves, when they started all going bankrupt, they changed their whole financial system. And this is why they lost the support of the Soviet Union, at least one of the reasons. But it still has a very, very socialist streak. I remember when I made Aliyah, I had to sell all my guns because it's almost impossible to get a gun in Israel. Facebook helps people romanticize Israel, but they really have to go and see. Yes, there's people with guns because there's soldiers in the street.
I remember Rabbi Rahim says that he owns a gun and he normally walks with it.
Right, so he must live in a hostile area. Like if you live in East Jerusalem, which is pretty much where the Mount of Olives is and stuff like that, that's considered a hostile area.
Yeah, and actually he encouraged people to have one. Right, I guess you're saying now that
you can't get a gun there unless you're a citizen for at least 3 years, and then you still have to live in a hostile area. Like if you live in Tel Aviv, you're not allowed to get a gun. Unless you're a security guard. Or like if you live in a yeshuv, the settlement itself will issue you guns.
Okay.